What's going on, guys? It's the Filthy Casual, back with another Diablo 3 video. Today we're looking at the Legacy of Nightmares, Pet King, Thorns Necromancer. Now this is a Pet King Necromancer because you can have 18 minions out pretty much for the whole rift, huge battles with the enemy, kind of what the Necromancer class for me is. Visually very interesting, all about reanimating corpses and having your own personal army with you, so I think it's pretty cool. Now, before we get into it, I'd just like to say thanks to anyone who subscribed over the last few weeks and months. It really has been a great journey. Thanks for all the love, all the comments. I do read them all. I try and get back to all of them. It really has been great. Now, it's taken me quite a bit of time to find a Necromancer pet build that I like. So I'm going to set a like goal for this video. Massive 5 likes. I know you can do it, so smash that like button for me. Now, sorry it's taken a bit of time to upload this one. Having some pretty major renovations done to the house, so finding time to record and also to play has been a little difficult, but it's given me the opportunity to tweak the build a little bit, and it's pretty much how I want it now. So let's start with the Legacy of Nightmares part. Obviously it makes use of the buffed LON rings. So just in case you don't know, these rings now deal 750% damage per ancient item equipped. You have 13 slots, so obviously that's a mega amount of damage if you can get all the pieces ancient. That's a Pet King build because you've got 18 minions out pretty much for the whole rift. You've got your 7 command skeletons, you've got your golem, and you're also going to be making use of revives, and you can have up to 10 of them. So there is 19 in your personal wrecking crew, including yourself, and that makes for some interesting visuals, and then you really do feel like you're having a really big scrap with the rift enemies, which is nice. That's pretty cool. And it's a Thorns build because most of your damage, well in fact all of your damage, is coming reflectively through Thorns. And what I like about this build is that it is pretty powerful. So I'm doing GR90 in about 12-13 minutes. It's pretty tanky. I'm probably dying, I don't know, every other rift because I'm not running the cheat death because this is on softcore. And this is with about 950 Paragon, gem levels at 90 and 200 points in main stat in augmentation. So if you dumped another 1000 Paragon on this, if you had level 100 augments in every spot, you'd easily be clearing GR 100. There's definitely room to grow in the build. It is quite tanky, there's a lot of recovery in it, and it makes use of a few unusual and interesting items for the Necromancer. So let's get into it. So I suppose we'll start with a little bit of a crash course on Thorns. Now Thorns is really complicated. I'm just going to stick with the basic explanation, which is how I understand it. So if this is wrong, I'm sure somebody can correct me in the comments. But basically the way Thorns works is that when you get hit, you get a chance to reflect damage as Thorns. This is completely independent of your weapon damage, so it doesn't matter how powerful a weapon you have. Thorns is a separate stat on your sheet, and it has a chance to proc every time you get hit and reflect that damage. And my Thorns on my sheet is about 200k, and I think about the maximum for a Necro is probably about 230, so again I've still got about 10%, 15% to gear up to for that. Now the Thorns is multiplied by the LON bonus, so obviously that's pretty huge, but what we're going to do is we're going to make this a pet Thorns build, and we're looking for the pets to actually take the hits and deal the Thorns, and that is because we're using the Arbor Animator passive, which states that your pets gain 200% of your Thorns, so they will essentially do treble Thorns damage for you. Obviously the theory that I've gone for is because you've got 18 minions, that's 18 things potentially being hit, all of which increases your proc chance of your Thorns, because every time something gets whacked, there's a chance your Thorns will be reflected. So let's get into how we're going to juice up the Thorns. The first way is going to be through a Boyarsky's chip. That'll give you a set amount of Thorns depending on its level. The next way will be for secondary rolls on your gear, so for every gear piece other than your weapon you can roll Thorns in the secondary category. Some are more important than others, which we'll get onto in a bit, but this will be a huge source of Thorns for you. Next is you're going to put a Topaz in your weapon. That's going to give you 38,000 Thorns, which again is another huge boost. We're also going to be taking the Heart of Iron, either wearing it, which is probably the more likely way, or it'll be in the cube. That will give you Thorns equal to 300% of your vitality, so that's 4 times the amount of your vitality figure. So I've got 10k vitality, so another 40,000 Thorns there. And then finally we're also going to have a Spear of Gyro, again either equipped or in the cube, and this will give you a 15% boost for every cursed enemy that you have to your Thorns figure. So on your sheet, before you get into the rift, before you curse anything, the maximum you can have as a Necro I think is about 230k Thorns on your sheet, and we're going to have 200,000. Well, that's what I've got at the moment, so there's still another 15% that I can gear into. That figure goes up when you curse enemies with the Spear of Gyro. So as you can see, your Thorns figure is going to be juiced quite a lot by lots of things we've got in the build. When you combine that with the Armament Animator passive, you really do have a lot of Thorns for your pets. Now we also have some other multipliers, so we're going to be taking the Enforcer gem, which is going to give us a flat multiplier to pet damage. So again, this works with the Thorns, and then some of the pets also have their own multipliers. Now the Command Skeletons have got a multiplier because when you command them they get a 50% damage bonus, and also we're going to be taking the Bone Ring offhand, and this will give them a 30% damage increase for every second they spend attacking something. So if they spend 10 seconds attacking something, you get 300% damage, and obviously it creates like a stacking effect, so that the longer they attack something without the Thorns proccing, when it does finally proc, it's going to be a much bigger damage spike and explosion. Now your revives also have a multiplier, because we're going to be taking the Mask of Scarlet Death, and that will give you up to 150% damage increase per corpse consumed when you revive with the minions. So if you only revive one corpse, that's 150% damage increase, but often you'll have 2 or 3 corpses you'll be able to revive, and because the rune that we're taking on the golem is going to be the flesh golem, you can plop that down, and that basically leaves 8 corpses, so 8 times 150%, so every so often you will be able to get a super juiced revive out, and obviously if that gets hit and the Thorns proc, that's pretty big damage too. So the idea is that we're spreading the love around all the different pets. They've all got their own chance to proc Thorns, and they've all got their own multiplier, which again is what kind of makes it the Pet Army, Pet King build. Now we do have some other multipliers as well. We're going to be taking Tragul's Corroded Fang, again either equipped or in the cube, and that will give us a 200% multiplier to cursed enemies. You're going to be applying curses to as many enemies as possible. We'll get into how we're going to do that when we look at the skills. You're also going to take the Convention of Elements in the cube, so when that rolls on physical, because Thorns is a physical skill, you'll get a 200% damage multiplier. So it's kind of like treble damage, and because Necro only has 3 elements, if you aggregate it across the rift, it's about a 100% damage increase. You can make an argument for swapping to a Crispin's here. Crispin's will give you 100% against slowed enemies and treble that against any other hard CC. But to be honest, because it's Thorns build, you don't really want enemies slowed, and you don't really want them stunned or frozen or anything like that. The only way that we'd have of proccing the Crispies in the build would be probably be slow if we get Decrepify on them, and also potentially the taunt from the Boyarski's chip. But again, if something's taunted and hitting you, it's not going through all the other pet multipliers. So I've gone for the COE, but it is quite debatable. I've tested both, and there's not much of a difference. Now, another multiplier we have is Spreading Malediction, and that will give us a 1% damage increase for every enemy cursed. This synergizes quite well with our other passive that we're going to take, which is Eternal Torment, which means that our curses last forever, so you really can get your damage juiced up quite a lot by cursing lots of different enemies. We also do have a Bane of the Stricken in the build, so the more times we hit something, the more times the minions hit, we get more stacks of this. So again, the longer it takes for the Thorns to go off, generally the higher the value will be. So I think that takes care of all the damage multipliers and how the Thorns is juiced, so we may as well round out the gear. For your amulet, you're going to be taking a Wisdom of Kalon. This is going to be for the extra bone armor stacks, which will give us a toughness boost. You're going to be taking Nemesis braces. These are essential because this is kind of an elite hunter build. You want your Thorns proccing against the enemies with the most health, that will give you the most progression, so the Nemesis braces really do help out. Plus there's nothing really particularly useful that you can take. You could try the Thorns Van braces, but really again this is you being hit, dealing Thorns damage yourself, which whilst it would be useful, I think the Nemesis braces probably just edge it for the general progression. But again, it's a swap that you could certainly play around with. We're going to be taking a Dainty's Binding Belt for the damage reduction. There will always be cursed enemies around when we get to the skills, and this will give you essentially double toughness. Speaking of double toughness, you're also going to be taking an Aquila Cuirass. You're going to have your essence pretty much at max the entire time, so this will be up, again, pretty much nearly all of the rift. You're going to be taking the Illusory Boots, which are really nice because it means that you can just walk through enemies unhindered. That means you can reposition yourself pretty easily. For your pants, you're going to be taking the Golem Skin Breeches. This is really handy because it's going to be a 30% damage reduction whilst your Golem is alive, and also it brings the cooldown or it reduces the cooldown on command golem. And what that basically means is that you can get a super juice revive out more often. So again, pretty handy. For gloves, you're going to be taking the morbid gauntlets, and this is just so that your golem poops out a corpse every second. And that means that you can always have your 10 revives out, because there's always going to be corpses to reanimate. And then the last gear piece, which is not particularly important, is your shoulders. This is a fairly open slot. I'd say best in slot's probably the pauldrons of the Skeleton King for an extra free res chance, but really any shoulders you've got will do. So that covers the gear, so we'll go through the skills in a bit of detail. So as I mentioned, we've got command golem in there. We're going to be taking the flesh golem rune. That's so that we can plop a golem down and have 8 corpses to revive for a really powerful revive minion. You're going to be taking command skeletons, and we're going to have the dark mending rune for them, and what that means is that you'll get a 0.5% heal every time they hit something, which is obviously really handy for recovery. For your revives, we're going to go with personal army rune. That's going to give you up to 10% damage reduction, so 1% damage reduction per revive. You can go for the increased damage rune here, extra 25% damage on them. What that does is it reduces the duration that they live, so it goes down from 15 seconds to 10 seconds. So it's a bit of a trade-off really. They're alive not quite as much, so you'll struggle to get 10 out quite as often as you would do normally. So I've found that the personal army rune is best, because again, once you're pushing this build, you know, upwards of north of GR 90, toughness is a bit of an issue, so that extra 10% you know, is really handy. But by all means you can swap it if you want. I've mentioned cursing quite a lot, and we're going to be taking Grim Scythe with the Curse Scythe rune. Because of our Trag'Oul's Corroded Fang, we've got a 100% chance to apply a curse, so all you have to do is hit an enemy with this skill, and you'll automatically get one of the 3 curses applied. Now it is random, so you don't know what you're going to get, so you want to keep hitting enemies to make sure they've got all 3 curses on them. So you're going to have the base effect of Frailty, so they'll die at 15% health. You'll have Leech, so you'll get a 2% heal of their life pool whenever you hit them. And you'll also have Decrepify, so they'll be slowed and deal reduced damage. So you want to make sure you get triple curse, particularly on tough enemies like Elites, Champ Packs and the Rift Guardian, because it really will make a big difference. We're going to be taking Bone Armour for the damage reduction, which as I say ties in with the Wisdom of Kalon. Now you normally go for Dislocation as a Necro, but you don't want a stun, you don't want any crowd control effects, so we're just going to go with Harvest of Anguish, and that'll give us a 15% move speed buff. So we're going to have 40% move speed through the whole rift, and we're going to be able to have the illusory boots to just walk around as we please. So that's quite nice. Now the last skill, I've gone for Blood Rush and Potency. This is basically just to increase utility, so you have your teleport, it'll get you out of sticky situations, it'll get you out of jailer, it'll stop you getting frozen on occasion, and the 100% armor buff that Potency provides is pretty useful for the Necro, because armor's really going to help you out. So passive wise, Aberrant Animator we've talked about, Eternal Torment we've talked about, Spreading Malediction we've talked about, so that just leaves one last slot. Now normally I would go for Final Service, because the res is pretty important, but unfortunately what it'll do is it will consume all your minions, and that's not particularly great for this build. Obviously if you are playing hardcore, you're just going to have to take it, there's no other option, you're just going to have to do your best with it. If you're not playing hardcore, I would go with Grisly Tribute. What this will do is it'll give you 10% of your life per hit every time your minions hit something. So if you have 18 minions out, constantly hitting things, your recovery, provided you've got a decent amount of life per hit on your gear, is pretty good. And what it means is that we can take 3 damaging legendary gems rather than having to work in like an esoteric alteration or a gizzard gem. So I find this is very useful. It also means you can go off and hide, you can teleport away, leave your minions to hit things, and you will still recover health, which is pretty useful. So legendary gem wise, just to recap, you've got the Biarski's Chip, you've got the Enforcer, and you've got the Stricken. So the Stricken and the Command Skeleton Bone Ringer stacks do add up quite a lot, so you can get some pretty big thorn spikes, and enemies can just disappear very quickly. So in terms of gear stats, I'll go through them individually, but roughly speaking, you want Thorns as your number 1 roll. Now this can roll to 9,500 on your shoulders, chest, belt and amulet, so obviously very important to get those, and then up to 3,500 on every other gear piece. Main stat obviously is a multiplier for Thorns, so that's pretty useful. Vitality, because we've got the Heart of Iron, it's going to give us toughness, and it's also going to boost our Thorns. Life per hit's pretty important because of the Grisly Tribute. passive. Command skeleton damage is important, and then also attack speed, because you want to get those stricken stacks up as high as possible. And also CDR is fairly useful. It's not a bad stat, but I'd probably gear for that the absolute least, because if you've got higher CDR, more teleports, more potency, and more golem, flesh golem procs that you can plop down. In terms of gems in your gear, I've gone for the life helm, or the life gem in the helm, just for the extra toughness. CDR, it is fairly useful, but I just think the extra life and toughness is more what I want. Now in the gear, I've gone for topazes. At my level of Paragon and damage, this seems to be a better choice for me. But I suppose in theory, if you had enough intelligence, you might benefit from the extra thorns more than you would do from this. So looking at the gear pieces specifically and the stats, for the Tragul's Corroded Fang, you want intelligence, vitality, attack speed and life per hit. Obviously socket a topaz in there. For your gloves, you want to have intelligence, vitality, armor, life per hit and thorns. In fact, I'll just say thorns for everything, obviously. For your shoulders, intelligence, vitality, armor, command skeleton damage and thorns. For your Mask of Scarlet Death, int, vitality, armor and thorns. As I say, life gem in the helm. For your chest, you want int, vitality, armor, and thorns damage. Fortunately, this rolls with int and vitality, so it's more likely to have the Heart of Iron, but obviously you just pick whichever is best out of that and you're a keeler. For your belt, you want intelligence, vitality, life percent and armor. Again, the thorns roll on there as well. For your pants, you want intelligence, vitality, armor, thorns. For your boots, intelligence, vitality, armor, move speed, and thorns. For your necklace, it's quite important to get the thorns roll because it is quite high, but obviously it's going to be quite hard to get. You want physical percent damage, int and vitality, and obviously a socket as well for your Piarski's chip. For your braces, you want physical skills 20%, intelligence, vitality, life per hit and thorns. For your two rings, you want intelligence, vitality, armor, thorns and a socket. Then for your bone ringer, percent damage obviously is close to 30% on the secondary affix. You also want to get intelligence, vitality and increased skeleton command skeleton damage. So don't worry, just in case you missed any of that, there will be a D3 planner link in the video description. The only other thing is Paragon, really. So for your core Paragon, you want to get your move speed up to 25%. You don't need any in max essence. Intelligence and vitality is a bit of a balance. I've dumped all mine into intelligence, but as I said earlier, there gets a point when increasing intelligence will probably not as beneficial as increasing vitality, but that's something to play around with. For your offense, attack speed, cooldown reduction, and then the crits don't matter for this. For defense, you want armor, life percent, life per second, all res. Maybe switch all res and life per second, it's probably not that important which way around they are. For utility, life per hit, area damage, resource cost reduction, gold find. The only one really that's helping, I think, is the life per hit, because I don't think Thorns procs area damage. But if someone knows that, then let me know, because that will probably change how I gear the stats. But that's pretty much the build. So gameplay wise, what you need to do is you basically find an elite or champ pack. Obviously a yellow is ideal because you only need to kill that enemy. You command your skeletons so that they start their stacking effect on them. You swipe your Grim Scythe to get as many enemies as cursed as possible to boost up your Spear of Gyro, to get your curse on for the Trag's Fang damage boost, to get your curse on for the Dainty's Binding damage reduction. And then I pretty much numlock the revives, just because I just find it's easier, and every time command golem is off cooldown I will use it, and then that will give me a super juiced up revive. And other than that, you need to make sure your bone armor stacks are up, and then you just teleport to avoid damage. And you know, as I say, just your job is to curse things as much as possible, because the more curses, the more thorns, and the bigger your spreading malediction bonus. So it gives you the illusion that you're doing something, because you are swiping away trying to help out by whacking stuff. But mainly, the trick to it is to get your command skeletons on the particular enemy that you want. Now, some Rift Guardians can be a bit of a problem. I mean, Thorns is just an inconsistent mechanic. Some enemies will do attacks that won't proc it very often. Some affixes that they have seem to proc it more than others. So it is going to feel inconsistent. But the good thing is that with the Stricken, with the command skeleton Bone Ringer buff, you can always burn an elite or Rift Guardian down. Even if your Thorns doesn't proc, it's just going to take a while. And obviously some of the Rift Guardians will just instantly disappear because their attacks just proc Thorns quite a lot. But as I say, it's interesting build, it's different, it's fun. I quite like it. I quite like having so many minions around, so it's quite nice. I enjoy it. If you have found it useful, if you think you're going to give it a go, drop a like. That would be greatly appreciated. And subscribe if you want to see some more videos. So that'll do for me. Hope you come back and see me soon. I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.